Hey, Ross, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here, Carl.
I'm sorry, man. We meant to call. It's Ken Corbin's fault.
That's
Who
all
is
right.
that? Who is that
I
power? I'm having a brain block. Who is that power company in Houston that melted down a bunch of years ago?
Enron.
Thank you.
And
Enron.
they weren't a power company per se.
They
They
just
were
they just
an
used to like
energy
broker
company.
power, and
Right.
they really did kind of have control of it. But then when they melted down, it was hard. The deregulated Texas market, it was hard to find someone to do a deal with who was in the same business, you know. And then
Right.
finally, I signed a deal with Direct Energy that worked out pretty well for us. Um, and then I don't know if that's still popular. Are people still, you know, I'm in a municipally owned utility here. I have a choice. I don't have a choice. I have LP&L in the city, and now I'm on Southwest Power. They did a great job during a storm, by the way. And so, but downstate in Houston and Dallas, are they able to trade energy still?
Yes, I mean it's basically a deregulated market in ERCOT, and
Yeah.
so you have you
So
have
so Gritty was
uh,
one of those deals you could
right.
buy. Yeah. Okay. All right. Let's
So
start.
so you have all of these retail electric providers that the consumers are able to pick uh, who provides their retail electricity, but that does not change the wires company that they're physically connected to.
And that's why I usually bought TX. Back then it was TXU because they own the wires. So if I had an,
Well, not exactly. They started out owning the wires, but
but they
once
were the
they were the original. That
right.
Encore split off from them, and Encore became the transmission distribution utility, and TXU became the retail electric provider.
But back then they still had or they were contracted with the city of Dallas for the wires.
Right.
And so if I had an emergency, I did actually have one once, a blown bus, you know, and when you've got a big medical complex, it wasn't that big, but I had it was like 30,000 square feet. I felt like I got service quicker. Because I bought my power from them, and I needed them to cut the lines in the building to work on it all weekend, and then you know turn it on immediately when that work was done. They were real quick, and I feel like if I was buying my power from another provider, they would have dragged their feet.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of times it's just now it's harder because everything is separate down there. It's harder to get a hold of the wires company than it used to be, and so you know
So since
deregulation changed a
look
lot of things.
since we're on this, let's continue. One of the bullet points of my questions to you is, and a lot of people are concerned that you know Lubbock's going to ERCOT. I always wonder why. I mean, they have brownouts in the summer, like almost every summer, from what I remember. Why are we so desperate to go to ERCOT when I always thought that Southwest Power was doing a fine job? I understand our contract ended and the rates were going to go up, but how much more? Is that incorrect?
It's not incorrect. You've got the premise correct. The devil was in the details with Lubbock moving to ERCOT, and it goes back to previous mayors, previous city councils, previous CEOs of LP&L. It goes back to the citywide blackouts, you know, that happened 2 or 3 times over the past 15 years. All of those things kind of circulated around to where Lubbock thought it would be best to jump into ERCOT. The contracts were expiring, but the city of Lubbock would have been able to get new contracts. They wouldn't have necessarily had to have built new generation, but the difference in the two and what they hung their hat on was the fact that the Southwest Power Pool had about a 13% capacity requirement for their load-serving entities. They could either contract that out to somebody or they could supply that 13% themselves through their own generation. And if you'll recall last week, you know, both ERCOT and Southwest Power Pool had EEA, which is Energy Emergency Alert Level 3 firm load shed. the big story to me, because we got to participate in both, the one in SPP lasted about 4 to 5 hours, where the ERCOT one lasted 68. And the reason is, and what Lubbock said, is ERCOT power will be cheaper because they don't have that capacity requirement in ERCOT. Well, you see what the end result is.
Right. The capacity requirement.
Of not having the capacity.
Right. Might be annoying when you look at it on the books, but it really comes in handy when you need it. It's like
right.
4-wheel drive for your
the
truck. The 4-wheel drive costs quite a bit more on a new truck, but it turns out to really work out for you when you need it and at resale.
Right.
Okay.
And so that was telling to me.
So why bother with these brownout? So maybe I should finish that line of subject. Do you think Lubbock's going to do okay with Lubbock joining ERCOT? Is that more money? Are they going to build more capacity?
No, there's no incentive. And that's going to be one of the fixes that the legislature and the PUC and everybody involved, is really going to have to look at, is a capacity requirement in ERCOT for all of the load-serving entities, because right now there is absolutely no incentive for dispatchable, which means, hey, call you up, you need to run, dispatchable thermal generation that provides capacity to the transmission system. There is no incentive right now for anybody to build generation in ERCOT. And until that's fixed, we're going to have this potential, forever until it's fixed.
So, and tell me if I'm wrong here, there were two problems during the storm. One was we didn't have enough capacity. The other was it was all freezing up anyway. Is that right?
Right. Yes. The first thing that happened during the weekend, really when it started getting cold, is you had a loss of wind, and of course solar too. But solar's there's not enough solar out there really to make a difference. Although in this case we needed everything that we could possibly have. But you lost a lot of your wind,
Hold your thought. We have to break. Hold your thought there. I really want to dive into this a little more and get the truth about it. I got Ross Aten, electrical engineer, and Carl Tepper on the Chad Hasty Show. All right, this is Carl Tepper and Ross Aten. Somebody said, who is Ross? Yeah, Ross is the chief engineer for one of the power providers around here. Ross, you're an electrical engineer too, aren't you?
Yes, sir. I got out of tech about, it's been going on 15 years come August.
I love Ross has a very distinctive voice, and he's got, an unassuming sort of accent, and he's a genius. And he tells
I don't know about that.
He tells a great story too. We're going to team up, to co-host with each other someday and guest host. We're kind of doing it today. I might have you on most of the hour if I can get you that long.
Sure.
So Ross, we were talking about the alternative energy was the first thing that kind of went down. Of course, the windmills froze up. In a C-130, if you're wondering how these propeller jet aircraft fly in the rain and snow and don't freeze up, we all know aircraft wings freeze up, but what about the propellers? Well, in a C-130, the leading edge of the propeller has these electric elements in them, and you turn them on in a freeze, and actually the aircraft senses the ice. And those propellers, you see a little light above my head as the flight engineer goes on, and that means we're in icing conditions, and the electric elements turn on, and also the bleed air. So the hot air from the engines runs along the leading edge of the wing, kind of like a little piccolo tube, they call it. Runs along the leading edge of the wings and keeps the wings from freezing. By the way, I don't like seeing that little light pop. I've only had a little light go on in Alaska and Seattle one time, and in Europe a couple of times. I don't like seeing it. I'd rather get out of that cloud and get out of the icing because, all this fancy stuff may or may not work. These propellers that are running these wind power systems do not have those de-icing systems, and that was one of the big problems with them. So Ross, I'm hearing all kinds of numbers about how much of ERCOT or Texas energy generation is alternative energy, specifically these windmills. How much is it really?
Off the top of my head, I can't give you an exact number, but I do know, like you said earlier, you were correct. It's around 25%. Sometimes, if the conditions are right, they can get a little bit more out of it.
And that's ironic considering Texas is the Republican conservative state and all, but we're a world leader in alternative energy.
Yes, and they've been more than fair to renewables for the past 20 years, in my opinion, almost too fair in some aspects. I mean, the state spent $5 billion to build these competitive renewable energy zone transmission lines to come up into the panhandle and, harvest all the wind to send it back down state. And I'm not saying that the net input to those CREZ lines was zero, but I can promise you that $5 billion last week could have been well spent elsewhere.
So if you had
for the bang for the buck.
Yeah, so if you had another $5 billion, there's no choice for you. You would go with the natural gas probably.
I would go with more dispatchable generation.
What does that mean?
Any of your thermal type plants, coal, nuclear, natural gas, a broad mix. Wind has its place, but an over-reliance on wind and solar will only lead to more instances of what happened.
Coal, has been in the crosshairs of environmentalists, and if it seems like no matter how much they call it scrubbers, is that right? And it seems like no matter how many you have, it's still pretty dirty.
They've really improved in the last 20, 25 years. They've really improved coal, and you hear the Modicon clean burning coal. It really is clean burning now, and it wasn't necessarily carbon dioxide. That's been the new thing to jump on coal about, but it goes back to sulfur dioxide and things like that they really started scrubbing out, in the late 70s into the 80s and 90s.
Okay, good. If people are wondering why coal keeps coming into the mix, because there's just so much of it, and so much of it domestically.
And it's a really good, stable, generating source of fuel. I mean, as long as the trains can run from Wyoming or wherever, or, even in Texas, the lignite mines, but most of the lignite's been shut down. As long as the trains can run, those plants can get their fuel. There's not this vast network of natural gas pipelines.
So the natural gas is the main supplier in Texas. Is that correct, or certainly one of the main factors?
That's correct. And from that ERCOT board meeting yesterday, we found out that about looking at the graph, and it was a little blurry to me, but it looked like about 28,000 megawatts of gas-fired generation was out of commission. And then there was about 18,000 megawatts of wind that was offline. So you add everything up, Texas or ERCOT had 48.6% of its available generation out of service during this.
So what was the problem with the gas-powered plants? What exactly froze up?
That's still not clear. There is a bunch of instrumentation and valves and things like that in the plants themselves. Some of the newer combustion turbines fared better if they had the gas available, but a lot of them, the newer CTs, they had supply problems, way upstream. But some of the older ones that use steam, you've got water, and if you don't have that stuff boiling and making steam, you're already behind the eight ball.
We're at the break. You can hang out, right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Okay. Let's, Ross, the bottom of the hour break is going to take a little longer, but hang on. I've got like 100 other questions for you. All right. Sure. Carl Tepper, Ross Aten, Chad Hasty Show. All right. Carl Tepper and Ross Aten getting, I feel like, some clarification of the questions that we might have about the power outage and the power outages throughout the state last week during the storm. Ross, why do we even do these brownouts? That seemed to be the beginning of the problem. People are switched off, never switch back on, and even if they do switch back on, then they just turn the heat up even more to catch up with the 15 to 45 minutes they were out. Do the brownouts really work for you guys?
Yes, that is why we are talking about what happened instead of what is continuing to happen. A point of clarification on the term brownout. A brownout is a reduction in system voltage. So you would see your lights dim a little bit. There's some science behind the fact that if you reduce voltage, you can save your load, your current. You can reduce it down a little bit. That's actually done in Energy Emergency Alert Level 2. Energy Emergency Alert Level 3, which is what ERCOT and the Southwest Power Pool were in, is a firm load shed. So your lights go out completely. It's not a blackout. What I refer to as a blackout is a complete system collapse, and thank goodness that we didn't get to that point.
They say we were 4 minutes, 37 seconds away from that.
Yes, and that's true. It's just that there would have been more things happen automatically in that 4 minutes or right after that 4 minutes that wouldn't have been in the ERCOT system operator's control necessarily, but things would have happened that would have shed an additional 25% of the load in ERCOT. Maybe stopped it, maybe not. But once you expend that 25%, you have no further abilities to arrest the decline in frequency, and then your plants can start tripping off in seconds instead of minutes. Okay. So yes, that was true, but it wasn't technically, and I'm sorry, the engineer in me just squirts out every once in a while. It wasn't technically accurate. There were going to be other things that happened in that timeline that might have stopped it. It just there would have been no human control. It would have been relays operating.
So what do we call it when they cycle down, 15-minute increments for different parts of the town or whole cities or what?
It's called manual load shed. And the discussion at the ERCOT board meeting yesterday was around using the term rotating blackouts or rotating outages. What happened is this situation deteriorated so quickly that the ERCOT operators had to call for such a massive amount of load to be shed statewide that a lot of us, and even Encore, the largest utility in the state, had to shed so much load that they weren't able to really rotate those outages for a considerable amount of time. Because if you rotate outages, what you do is you take out a neighborhood or an area and, wait an hour or hour and 30 minutes or whatever, really it's not ever going to be 15 minutes. The majority of the time it's going to be around 45 minutes. But you take that area down and then you go pick another area of your system that has about the same amount of load. You bring it down and then you bring the other side up. Well, what happened is you had area 1 down, then you had to turn around and take area 2 down, 3, 4, and so on. You didn't have anything else really to take down to bring something else up for, 12, 18, 24 hours, because the shortfall of available generation was so great. you're just stuck. All you could do is shed that load. Now, let me say what would have happened had we not shed that load. The frequency would have continued to decline. And what happens is those generators are built, and these are massive machines. I mean, I can't, if you've ever been to a power plant, you know how massive they are. But they're made to operate at 60 hertz. If you go over 60 hertz or under 60 hertz, they start vibrating. And at a certain level, the generator, if it doesn't come offline automatically from its relays that keep it in the system, if it doesn't come offline, sits there and vibrates, it's going to be destroyed. And then you're not looking at, a 1 or 2 day outage. You're not even looking at a 3 or 4 week outage or a month-long outage to build the system back. You're looking at years once those generators.
Is this kind of what happened? I think it was New York City, 1974, around then. There was a really hot summer. Con Ed was overloaded. Con Edison was the electric company, and they were going down. There was an engineer, I think in Niagara Falls, who tried to buck them up, and it took out the whole state, essentially.
Right.
It's
you had
kind of a similar.
That was an under frequency event.
Yeah.
Really, all of the blackouts begin, and we've never had a complete system collapse anywhere in the United States. You've had partial. The closest they got was in the Northeast, but thank goodness that in 2003. But thank goodness that the Eastern Interconnect is so large, that they could start sinking back to their neighbors. It took a couple of days, but they were having to do black starts. Was that
a heat wave?
Yes, it was in the summer, and it was a heat wave also. But what happened? It started in Ohio. You had a transmission line sagged down into a tree, tripped out. They didn't do manual load shed like they should have, and it collapsed. A very large piece of the Eastern Interconnect. But thank goodness it didn't collapse at all.
I'm getting to
so what happened in ERCOT. It's smaller regionally, doesn't have ties to its neighbors like the other interconnections do, and so they're really once you get down to I don't know how else to describe it. Once you get down to the nut cutting, you've got a small amount of time to work. And if you don't get that frequency decline stopped, then it's game over. You've collapsed the grid. You don't have a grid to work with, and now you're in black start. And that is a scary deal. That's when they talk about it taking weeks to an indeterminate amount of time to bring back power. That's a black start. And one thing that came out of the board meeting yesterday, and this is all public information, some of the media is reporting on it, but they don't know what to report on. And there's 13 black start generators in the state. These are smaller generators. Most power plants can't crank on their own. They have to use offsite generation. So in a black start, you have to go in.
In an airplane, we call it auxiliary power unit. APU helps you start everything else.
Yeah. But you've got to strip. You've got to manually switch these transmission lines, get all of the connected load off, and basically make a cranking path to what's called your next start generator that requires offsite power to crank. Yeah. And you get that one started. You start adding little bits of load on here, and you have what's called an island. There's 13. There would be 13 of these islands, and you would bring on a little load, energize a few more transmission lines. Then you would start syncing the islands together to build your grid back. A scary thing to me that really jumped out yesterday was that 6 of the 13 black start units weren't available in the middle of this. And
No
so
way.
if we had gone black,
because it's winter and they're usually prepping them for summer.
No, they're contracted to be available all the time. They were just having problems like all of the other generators were having.
All right, hold on. We're at the break. Then we're going to have the last segment. I should have had you on at the beginning of the show. We're at the break. I'm going to ask you about how much do we spend now for cold weather incidents, once in a generation storms. All right. All right, Carl Tepper and Ross Aten. I'm going to rush here because it's the last segment. I need another hour all of a sudden. Ross, how much, in your opinion, how much do we spend on this once in a generation storm? Or maybe we'll start having them more often. The earth goes through changes, climate. I'm not going to get into that. I don't believe, but we do know over history there's the ice age and heat waves. How much do you think we spend on this thing?
Carl, I couldn't begin to tell you. It's not only winterization, but Texas has grown so much over the past 20 years, over the past 10 years. And all that we have added, basically in ERCOT, a little bit of thermal generation, but the majority that has been added is wind and solar, and that's good. But it's good for cheap energy prices during the good times. But as we saw last week, it's not good for when you're in a crunch. We didn't get here overnight. This wasn't a 2-week ago problem. This has been a 20-year problem, and it goes back to not having any incentive to build thermal generation in the state. And I'm hesitant to get into that part of it because I really don't like talking about the policy aspects of it. It's boring to me. I think there's a lot of people that don't know what they're talking about.
By the way, I nominate Ross Aten for ERCOT Board of Directors, but that's a side note.
I don't think I'm qualified.
It pays, Ross.
But no, actually, it doesn't pay. Is the other thing.
They said it pays. I looked it up. Those guys make like $100,000 a year.
I'm not entirely for sure about that.
All right, we'll check into that.
But it's a 20-year problem, and it's going to take several years to get out of that. The key to it is a capacity requirement. And after the 2011 rolling outages that were actually rolling because ERCOT didn't have to call for such a massive amount of load shed, the Brattle report came out, and said, hey, we need to have a capacity margin in ERCOT. And everybody just went nuts. Liberals went nuts because it wasn't fair to renewables because renewables couldn't provide that capacity. Conservatives went nuts, and I will call out the Texas Public Policy Foundation on that. They were wrong then. They're acting like they're right now, but they were wrong then. They said all it's going to do is increase the cost of power, and, I was like, fine, y'all argue about it, but one of these days, these chickens are going to come home to roost, and they did. And it's not going to be something that we're going to get out of, very quickly. It's going to be a long process too. But what I'm already hearing and fearing is we're starting, everybody's circling their own wagons and protecting their own interests. And it's in the interest of the entire state to get this right. They didn't get it right the first time. They need to get it right now. And it's going to be listening to the industry experts that have told you already what the problem was, and we all got ignored. Do our political heroes listen to the experts? Right. And I'll say one more thing, and like I said, but I feel, in my industry, you don't criticize your elected officials, so I'm even taking my engineer cap off on this one. But what Governor Abbott said yesterday evening about the ERCOT operators was the biggest load of crap. It was a horrible press conference. These people in that control room in Taylor, Texas, were heroes. They did what they had to do. I suspected they were heroes. Yeah. In a very short amount of time, they prevented the grid the grid from completely collapsing, and for him to call them out the way he did was terrible.
They're running for cover, or they're going to be bold-faced lies, anything to deflect from them.
Yes, and I was so disappointed.
Ross, as we're completely running out of time, you and I want to speak for you for a second. We are both talk radio. Limbaugh passed away. I'm still reeling from it.
Yes, I am too.
I think you feel the same way. I started listening at South Plains Schwinn. Do you guys remember that on 34th Street? I worked there for 4 years. Don Fullwood used to have it on. Do not touch that channel. That was right after the Gulf War, and I know you were a huge fan. I don't know where that show's going to go. I'm curious to see if they can. I think Mark Stein's the obvious guy to take it. I heard he doesn't want to.
Yeah, and he doesn't. So, I don't think he wants to. I've been listening since I was 5 years old, and it just, it happened right in the middle of all of this.
I know.
And I mean, I took a moment to, I had to gather myself up, and just keep it going. But that one hurt. It hurt bad, and I don't know what the future will hold, but I can tell you, like everybody else has said, there's not going to be another one like him, because he made it fun. It was entertaining. Yes, he was right, but he was fun to listen to.
It was just a great show. I'd like to thank my company. I'm glad KFYO got together with Lamar Advertising, the billboard company. I'd like to thank Wes Frick for just putting those billboards together without being asked to. I gave him a hug, and I think they looked great over the weekend. I hope you got to see him. Ross, great job. Love you, man. And thank you for your insight. I think it's real valuable.
Thank you, Carl.
Thanks, everyone. Thank you, Chad, for letting me guest host today. And everyone have a great weekend, okay? You deserve it. Thanks, Connor. Great job.